Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. We've delved into the lore and history of many classes before, from brutish barbarians, wise druids, and the shifty rogues. But there is one which rivals all the others for renown, the noble Paladin. Just imagine, a massive horde of undead advances on your fortifications. At the head of the army is their leader, a demon lord. Hope has fallen with the last light of the day. Your walls collapse as the demon unleashes its spell. As the army of darkness rushes forward, a single warrior in shining armor steps forward to meet them. With a gleaming shield, he throws off their claws. He swings his vorpal blade and cuts down the undead. Soon, it is just him and the laughing demon. The shining warrior charges the incarnation of chaos. His magic burns like the sun and vanquishes the shadows. At long last, he stands victorious. His courageous actions save the people without any losing their lives. When you think Paladin, or sometimes called a Crusader, you are probably thinking something like this, right? That is how they are often portrayed in fantasy. A warrior in shining armor who sets out to vanquish the forces of darkness and fulfill his oath. Often they are fueled by righteous and even holy magic. They are the upholders of law and order, vanquishers of evil. But what was the truth about them? The word Paladin comes from Palatinus, which was the closest retainers of the emperor during the Roman imperial period. By the 5th to the 8th century, they were called the Palatine. It meant a high official who assisted the king in judicial decisions, though at times they would fully accept the roles. They could be stationed throughout the kingdom to serve as governors and judges, though eventually their title shifted to count. Though they began to be romanticized thanks to the Chanson d'Auguste cycle, a piece of 12th century French literature. And this brings us to the legendary 12 Paladins of Charlemagne. They are also called the 12 Peers. He was the king of the Franks, who lived in the 8th and the 9th century. The 12 Paladins were the French equivalent to the Knights of the Round Table. They were the representation of chivalry and Christian values who would battle against the invasions by Muslims. This is where the term Crusader comes in. The Crusades began as a response to the Byzantine Empire's pleas for aid after the attacks from the Seljuk Turks. This began a series of religious wars to push back Muslim influences and reclaim the Holy Land. One of the big powers during this time was the Knights of the Templar. They had their own chapels and military systems. In fact, they were critical to the development of the banking system. Now, there is a reason there are 12 Paladins, for that is the same number as there were disciples of Jesus. While there are always 12 of them, their exact roster does change. Most likely, there were some deaths and others retired over the years. So what sort of feats did these Paladins of Legends achieve? We have Roland, who wielded an unbreakable blade, who fought in many battles, leading his troops to victory. We also have Astolfo, who wields multiple magical items, such as a grimoire, which is filled with counter curses and dispelment magic, a horn, which creates a destructive loud noise and fills his foes with terror, a golden lance or spear, which will always dismount a foe, and a magic horse, Rabakano, known for its speed and other powers. Oh, and he also flew to the moon, and was cursed by a witch, and he was tasked to defeat giants, immortal thieves, and many more. He does sound a lot like our Paladin, doesn't he? We also have Fierabas, who according to Don Quixote knew how to make a healing potion. Mind you, that is Don Quixote, and he is well known for being an unreliable source. Ogier, who traveled to Avalon and spent time alongside the Knights of the Round Table. Yet there is another source of inspiration here, the Knight Errant, the Wandering Knight. And they again are tied to chivalric romance novels. They would travel the lands, righting wrongs, subduing evil. The usual idea. They were heavily tied to later parts of Arthurian legend. They were often knights which had no king which they served, and many were actively seeking a worthy king who deserved their loyalty, similar to the Ronin in Japanese history. Many would dedicate their tasks to a noble lady. There was one last inspiration, the original knight in shining armor, and even Prince Charming. and that would be Sigurd or Siegfried. He is probably the most famous dragon slayer, wielding his magic sword and cloak of invisibility to achieve countless feats. So there is a bit which has fueled this image. Eventually, it would coalesce in Dungeons & Dragons as our modern idea of the Paladin. There, they are warriors bound to their oath. They have some magical abilities, which is mostly designed to protect and heal, though they are known for their smite attacks, which deal holy damage. Does that match history? Well, minus the magical aspect, yes. As the Palatine, they enforce the king's laws and justice across the land, though that variation would often be more of an inherited position once it became the idea of a count. The idea of them going around and combating evil definitely fits the Paladins of Charlemagne and the Knights of the Round Table, to be sure. It is from the Paladins of Charlemagne and the Knights of the Templar which brings up the holy aspect of their connection to the Church, being sent by the Pope and even having their own chapels. Though there isn't a connection to the Templars' banking. Though the reason I could see that being absent is that they are meant to be selfless and serving others primarily, such as Sigurd was. Though the idea of paladins having healing magic does partially make sense when you add in the stories of Don Quixote, though that is from a later era. So it could be justified if you go with that idea. Throw in the anti-curse and anti-enchantment magic that a Stoifel had, and we could argue that their protection magic also makes sense. Since they are based on knights, them wearing heavy armor does make perfect sense. Give them a sword and a shield, or a giant two-hander, and they are good to go. Due to the idea of them being judges, a nice mace or warhammer wouldn't be a bad piece of equipment. I do like the idea of them carrying a book for two reasons. One is of course the holy book of the world, and the second being inspired by Stoifel's magic book, both of which make great arguments for them. The shift to seeking to purge demons, witches, and other evil creatures does tie back to the feats of the 12 paladins and the Knights of the Round Table. We do need to talk about them being in armies, full-on crusades. This means that they should have training in formations, strategies, and tactics. But that will depend on the scale and situation of the world. Okay, but how should the fantasy paladin really work? Well, of course, there is a lot of options of how they should work. The first question is who should be a paladin? What are the requirements? Well, if we go with the Palatine variant, it could require ties to nobility. Though, if we draw from the Knight Errant, it would be anyone seeking to purge evil that could apply. Lastly, it could be those tied back to the Church, and that can have an influence on their actions. The Wandering Paladin could easily be your run-of-the-mill do-gooder, but the others would be more stationed. Now, due to their goal of vanquishing evil, they could be sent out to exterminate covens of witches, demons, and evil monsters. A crusade of sorts. And that would encourage the use of holy magic, to be sure, power given by their gods. Now, this does create an issue with the cleric, who also draws their power from their god. A distinction could be that clerics don't fight in melee, and paladins do. A spellcaster and a warrior variant of divine power. Potentially, that means that a paladin should have the same sort of spells as a cleric, and based on which god they serve could influence their powers. The idea of their oath could stem from their tie to a king, or we could alter it back to their god. This could be a less holy variant, and one more tied to law and order, and that could be the guidance for them. This variation could either be stationed or acting like the Knight Errant. Generally, they should serve as the protectors and vanguard for the world, both in battle and healing. If done right, they could easily serve as the world's guards and judges. Though, when a crusade is called, they could gather in vast numbers. Potentially, they could work as military leaders and commanders in battle. Potentially, they should have the ability to bolster their forces. Now, we often see them as adventurers. Would that make sense? Well, for the Knight Errant option, that is the perfect job for them. Additionally, if they are sent by quest by either their king or the church, they would work as well. One idea you could do is to copy the 12 paladins idea, where there is always 12. No more, and when one falls, a new one awakens to serve. This could be a fun idea in a story, to be sure. But the problem would be with the rest of the party. They clearly would be a lawful class, most likely good or neutral. but maybe with some work evil? That could depend on many factors. So how would they work with a devilish rogue, someone who doesn't follow the rule of law? Or someone who goes against the church, say a warlock serving a devil? While it could take some work, it might create some issues to be sure. So some party incompatibility to contend with. However, that brings up the Blackguard, an anti-paladin to put it simply. Fallen paladins, which arise for a few reasons. And that will be a full discussion in itself, and it could be something which paladins need to deal with. Say, falling from their god's grace, being exiled by their king. I'll let you decide yourself how that could happen. Overall, the paladin in fantasy does seem to fit perfectly with the historic aspects. Well, except for the use of magic. But that is the defining trait for a fantasy world, is it not? There is a lot you can do for them with your world building. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.